Hello, my name is Manpreet Kaur. Here I am going to talk about an Aboriginal people who live in Australia. I am going to talk about their lifestyle as well as the things that which were used by them and different type of activities that they did in earlier times. Firstly, I am going to talk about prehistory of an Aboriginal people in Australia. They originally came from Asia via insular Southeast Asia. Early humans arrived as early as 65,000 to 80,000 years ago, and so it is consistent with the argument made by some scholars that the migration of anatomically modern humans out of Africa and adjacent areas of Southwest Asia along so-called southern route predated migration to Europe. Scholars caution the earlier dating of human arrival in Australia, which is used on the use of optically stimulated because the Northern Territory sites in areas of terminate activity which can displace artifacts downward to older levels. And after that, the name of an Aboriginal Australian people. Firstly, they are called Torres Strait Islander people, and it is believed that they lived over 40,000 years in Australia, and as well as Torres Strait Islander people only used the land for things such as shelter, water, food, and weapons. However, there are some initial reactions of an Aboriginal Australian people towards the British people because they did not know who the British people were. They were unaware about British people, and they also did not know that how they came and about their lifestyle also. They said that the British people reacted with aggression with an indigenous people, and they also afraid from British people. British people ignored their traditional ways to do any kind of work because they did not like their work as well as their traditions also. In a point of leadership and social control in Australia, and indigenous people have no chiefs or other any centralized institutions of social or political control because there were no social barrier about any disputes or conflicts. Societies were open because everyone has right to give views about different kind of works as well as activities also. In addition to it, leadership roles were more situationally determined, and both gender acquired prestige through knowledge of ritual performance. They get knowledge about the customs which were mandatory for them to lead a life in a optimistic way. There were some gender differentiations because the difference between age and sex, and both genders had different status and roles. There were division of labor on sex based. Men and youths mostly hunted large game. On the other hand, women hunted small games such as lizard. And males' network obligations were wider than females. If I talk about the socialization, then they had self-regulation and they were more optimistic about maintenance of law and order, and as well as they believed the maintenance of peace and rules were narrowly localized, which were important for them, and they did informal meetings that were essential and preferred by elders. Multi-purpose tools, a useful threefold classifications for an aboriginal tools was proposed by the archaeologist Richard Gold, and they used different tools such as rigging, stick, spear. All these tools were lightweight and portable, and they used appliances like as large base stones for different purposes. In the economic organization, they had a nomadic way of life. In Australia, it had a only continent where the entire indigenous population maintained a single kind of adaptation such as hunting and gathering. It was an interesting fact in the life of an Aboriginal people. And some scholars gave view about the life of an indigenous people because they thought that early practice of agriculture and aquaculture by them, because it was performed by an indigenous people. They had more beliefs in different rituals and customs such as dreaming, legacy, and they had resources were replenished and social life. They used rituals and some of the customs which were followed by them to determine any kind of work. They also had the respect of regulations which were made by elders, as well as they gave the respect to sacred places, and they respect each other. In their living places, they liked to live in which places where were well established camps areas, as well as places which were close to water. After that, they liked to move in small family groups, and they had much larger territory in arid or desert areas. It was interesting for them that when they went out, they collected food and they returned in the late afternoon or spending few days away because they had well defined tracks. In the viewpoint of exchange and trade, they had promotion of intergroup harmony because they liked to live in harmony, and indigenous people had more primary goals because they set their goals about different purposes. They had an original values which were unselfishness, and they gave preference to gift exchanges, and they had religious obligations in which they did lot of deeds to adopt the religious culture. Traditional socioculture patterns. After the settlement of an Aboriginal people, they utilized the entire continent and people adapted successfully the large range of ecological and climatic conditions. They had wet temperate when they live in climatic conditions, as well as they liked to live in tropical rainforests. If I shed light on their linguistic views, I have to speak that they had hundreds of dialects, and they had more knowledge about more than 200 different languages, and they were multilingual or bilingual. People were language named groups because they preferred to give the name to different groups according to their language. And in this point, they had no one-to-one relationship between language and tribes because both were different from each other. In their social groups and categories, an Aboriginal society was the outcome of interplay. They shared the ownership of a specific set of sites. They had longer conflicts because of sharing land, and they liked to attack, initially focused on individual Europeans. In their hunting, they also like to kill the sheep, cattle, and horses. Ceremonies play an integral role in their life because it it is in their culture. Most ceremonies were combined dance and songs. Some ceremonies were a rite of passage for young people between 10 to 16 years. Ceremonies often elaborate body decoration and costumes. They had more belief in sharing because they liked to share their things with European. They liked to share their land, teachings, and different learnings with their Europeans. In addition to it, culture focused on diffusion as well as focused on the expansion of networks of relationships because the culture difference did not correlate closely with ecological zones. They had greater emphasized on maintaining boundaries. In the some important concepts, they had lack of common lifestyle elements, and it is very difficult for each group to understand the culturally and spiritually, which increases the level of violation and conflict.